So, good evening, all, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Economy, Place, Access and Transport Scrutiny Committee. And welcome to those watching from home. We just have one main agenda item tonight, but it's a biggie. It's looking at the local transport strategy. Look forward to getting stuck into that one. But yeah, I'll run through the routine agenda bits before we get into that. So, well, actually, first thing to say is we have a couple of substitutions. So Councillor Dave Merritt is subbing for Councillor Whitcroft, and Councillor Vassey, you are subbing for Councillor Pearson. Is that right? Yeah. Good to have you here. Councillor Nelson, we are expecting, I'm assuming she's on the way back from work. It's always a bit tight sometimes, getting over, but she'll be here in due course. Anything else like that to cover? I don't think so. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Merritt.
Just in terms of transport, they're on my register of interest, but I'm a member of a number of transport pressure groups, the York Bus Forum, the York Cycle Campaign, and so on. So given the transport discussion, I think I should mention them. I don't see that there's actually a direct conflict of interest there. Also, later on your work plan, I noticed there's an item about the Yorkshire Water and so on. I just flag again, it's on my form that I'm an independent member of the Yorkshire Forum for Water Customers, which is the body that was originally set up by Ofwat to basically look at the company's business plans, its performance, and the rest of it, and I chair its environment sub. So just record those.
Thank you, Councillor Merritt, much appreciated. That'll be made a note of. Outside of that, I can't see any other hands. So we'll have a look at minutes, which need approving. I've got minutes here from March and April, and I think that does correspond with the public papers this time around. I didn't have anything to raise, but we have had the eagle eye of Councillor Hook raise a handful of accidental omitted words, which I'm happy to work in. Unless members want me to read them out, we'll just proceed with that. Thank you, and thanks, Councillor Hook. Much appreciated. And that then brings us to public participation. And we have a few speakers tonight, which is great. And the first speaker is Ms. Flick Williams, who is speaking remotely on the local transport strategy. Flick, can you hear us?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You know the drill. 3 minutes, fire away.
Today, I should like to raise some issues referencing information that has become available since the consultation closed. I hope this will inform your discussion. First, I trust you are aware that Minister Mark Harper is considering placing a moratorium on the rollout of new bus stop bypasses. If that comes, that will raise some interesting challenges for schemes currently in delivery, such as the Station Gateway. Furthermore, Living Streets has published its detailed 135-page long research entitled Inclusive Design at Bus Stops with Cycle Tracks. Its findings are complex and not easily summated in 3 minutes, but I think you should note, and I quote, "Zebra crossings do not perform as expected based on their legal status. The consequence is they are not currently providing a reliable tool to sufficiently help a pedestrian who feels they need support to cross the cycle track." They conclude, more work is needed to bring disabled people and designers together in a constructive and respectful manner, identifying the reasonable adjustments that need to be made on equalities grounds. Again, for the Station Gateway, this happened only at the 11th hour, owing to unrelenting pressure from disabled people, and at a point where we were told that the majority of elements could no longer be changed, not satisfactory for administration that seeks to champion equalities. The city owes a debt of gratitude to Bus Forum member Alan Robinson, whose detailed technical drawings of alternative layouts were, I believe, a significant factor in achieving last-minute improvements. He died suddenly at the start of the month. Rest in peace, Alan. So returning to your report, firstly, I take issue with disabled and older people being categorised as interest groups. We are not. We are rights-based groups that reflect our protected characteristics in law. 90% of respondents agree with accessibility. So what does that actually mean? I wrote an 8,000-word response and I still don't know. I'd be more confident if those involved in writing this strategy had received any disability equality or inclusive design training. I was asked by the then exec member for transport to present to the Transport Strategy Steering Group and was cancelled 3 times. Let's be clear, that's professional access consultancy for free, and the fact it never happened speaks volumes. Alarmingly, the report talks of balancing citywide and immediate resident perspectives. That is code for notions of the greater good or utilitarianism will be used to override equalities concerns and the public sector equality duty. Pinch points between modes, also code for rolling out infrastructure that disadvantages the already most disadvantaged. We've already seen parking bays removed from the disabled residents of Queen Street with meaningless mitigation. Disabled people already make 40% fewer journeys than those not. We cannot have a transport strategy that further adds to that disadvantage. Thank you.
Thank you for all of that, Flick. A number of strong and absolutely interesting points that you've raised there, which I hope and trust that colleagues will jump into. Thank you again for your contribution. Our next speaker tonight is with us in person. That's Andy DeGorn. Welcome, Andy. You are another one who is, I trust, familiar with how this works. You've got 3 minutes. Fire away.
Switch on first. Thank you. Firstly, York Green Party welcomes progress towards the new transport strategy for York to deliver on challenging targets in the 2022 climate strategy. To quote from the draft transport strategy that the Lib Dem Green executive approved 15 months ago, this requires a 71% reduction in emissions from transport, with many UK councils concluding car use will need to fall by around 20%. It goes on, current COVID trends show a return to car travel, which will have to be reversed through a major shift towards more active travel and use of public transport. This needs to be delivered through the agreed strategy. To reduce by 20%, it's likely that walking and cycling rates will have to double and bus use will have to increase by 50%. So all this was in the policy 15 months ago. With the exception of further studies and unpublished consultants' reports, this council has been largely treading water since then, while it carried out the big transport consultation. To quote from the excellent York Cycle Campaign 15-month-old challenge to politicians and council officers in the 42 Ways booklet, it's time to be brave and to think big. For politicians to come up with an actual strategy that puts people first, not vehicles. It's the job of officers to implement it. That's a quote. So is this paper today the answer to that challenge, even though likely impact for this step change is yet to be spelt out to the electorate and businesses? If this committee wants serious scrutiny of actions implementing transport measures, I would suggest Tadcaster Road ran out of funds before delivering on the most critical pinch points for cycling to and from Copmanthorpe. Bus service improvement plan. None of the planned bus priority even consulted on, with just 10 months of the 3-year funding window remaining. We're still in managed decline with further bus cuts this week. It was right to use BSIP funds for short-term rescue of routes to communities, but the so-called enhanced partnership has so far failed to create a long-term strategy to reverse decline or secure tangible improvements to punctuality and viability. Still no draft, let alone adopted, local cycling and walking plan, resulting in 0 capital funds this year from Active Travel England. a situation made worse by not a single spade in the ground on the Jubilee Terrace Riverside route, despite £1 million coming from Active Travel England March 2023 for a shovel-ready scheme. So I do hope the advent of a new Transport Executive member and a Labour Mayor for North Yorkshire will mark a turning point, enabling this administration to deliver on its mandate to actually deal with the climate change and transport challenges we face in York. I'm sorry, I won't work out the technology, but yeah.
Thank you for that, Andy. Much appreciated as ever. And bang on time, really. Okay, so I think we have one more speaker, and that's Professor Anthony May, who is taking part remotely. Can you hear us, Professor May?
I certainly can.
Cool. I think you're quite familiar with all of this too, so whenever you're ready.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of York Civic Trust. We warmly welcome the Council's initiative in developing a local transport strategy, and we're very pleased to see the high level of public support which each of the 10 policy focus areas attracted. We've suggested ways in which several of these, particularly on freight, enforcement and finance, can be strengthened, and we hope to see those reflected in the strategy to be published next month. At the Council's invitation, and you may remember our presentations of a year ago to your committee, we've updated our 9 case studies of good practice and have added 2 further outline ones on Leeds and Leicester. Paragraph 8 of the report before you summarises some of the findings from those case studies, but I suggest there are some other important messages that need to be picked up. First of all, changes in the way we travel are needed throughout the city, rather than, as one might infer from paragraph 8, just in the city centre. Critically, they will involve reducing our dependency on the car. Secondly, all of our case study cities provide a clear structure for the actions that they propose to take. They set challenging targets and they monitor performance against those targets. They provide evidence that the actions proposed will meet those targets. They assess the financial requirements and they identify funding sources. And they have an implementation plan designed to secure the confidence of funding bodies. All of these, we argue, must be included in York's local transport strategy if it is to be effective and if it is to attract that confidence from the Mayor, from Active Travel England, from the Department for Transport. None of them has yet appeared in public documents. There are now barely 2 weeks left in which to complete the strategy for submission to Executive, and we encourage you in the Scrutiny Committee to stress the importance of the published version, including all of those, including timelines, targets, predictive assessments, funding programs, and a clear demonstration of value for money. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Appreciated as ever. And we'll absolutely take what you've said into consideration during our discussions. I believe that is all of our public speakers. Thank you for those who took part. And without further ado, we will get into the main item now, which is a look at the York local transport strategy and sort of the council's current thinking on all of that post the big consultation which has recently taken place. We have a few officers with us to talk to that this evening, and we have how should I word this, soon to be officially appointed executive member for transport in attendance. We can take the paper as read, but as ever, if you want to give a sort of overview before we get into questions and comments, that'd be great. And I believe you also have a presentation to share with us. So for the public's benefit, the committee hasn't seen this yet either. So we'll have to think on our feet or our backsides because we're sat down and take it in and hopefully have an even more useful discussion as a result. So officers, fire away. Introduce yourselves too, if you like. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm James Gilchrist. I'm the Director for Environment, Transport and Planning, and I'm joined by Julian Ridge and Laura Thornton, who I'm sure will introduce themselves. Back in October 23, executive, the new council, I should say, set its own vision for transport in York through the executive and identified 10 policy areas that it wanted to 10 policy focus areas that it wanted to really underpin everything around transport. As you've alluded to, that was consulted on up until February this year. We took to March's executive that update on the local transport strategy and the initial cut of those that consultation response, which showed very strong support from the public for those 10 policy focus areas. What you're about to see tonight is a more detailed cut, which is hot off the press, I think it's fair to say. So this is literally come about in the last few days in terms of some more detailed analysis of those consultation responses, which there's masses of information around this. We will be publishing a lot of this data on the open data platform before executive, but Laura's going to take you through the consultation and some of the more in-depth analysis that we've been able to do in terms of understanding both what people have told us and where some of those challenging bits of the city are, what different demographics have told us. Then what we'll finish off with is Julian pulling together how we'll take some of that information in terms of developing the local transport strategy for executive. So over to Laura.
Thank you, James. Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Thornton. I'm a communications manager here at City of York Council. I am your dedicated resource on this project. So I work on this and only one other project, which is the BSIP, which is obviously highly related as well. So over autumn and winter, as James has said, we began to plan one of the most significant consultations that the City of York has seen for quite some time on probably one of the biggest issues that we face as well. So as James mentioned, there is an awful lot of data. There are a lot of rabbit holes to go down, and it is a genuinely fascinating topic. And we've selected basically the key indices from each of the 10 policy areas to run through with you tonight. If there are other areas of interest, I'm happy to create new graphs and maps and all that kind of stuff, because we've cut it in what we think are the interesting ways, but there may be other interests that you want to see. So if we kick off with the first slide, please. We're just going to make sure it all hooks up to Zoom and everything. As many of you know, then as an overview of the consultation itself, from the outset, we knew that this had to tie a lot together. It had to tie the key priorities and that thread running through everything that we do now to ensure that we are delivering equality, affordability, climate and health. That then translated into a consultation which reached all corners of York geographically and demographically. We visited primary schools, we visited the college, we went to the Deaf Cafe, we went to libraries, we went on the mobile library, which I can highly recommend, it's great fun. And in essence, brought together everyone who wanted to have their say, was given the opportunity. We also, I'll go through it actually and show you. This was a headline results that we reported in March. So this focused on the online results because we hadn't yet had the chance to go through all the offline submissions. But as you can see, more than 50 events, more than 1,000 people were met during those events, in addition to the 1,342 online responses. And like I say, geographically, we ensured that we really did go north, south, east and west and everywhere in between. We were pleased with the representation from the age categories. Again, that yellow banner is only the online respondents. So if you add in all the primary school children and all the college students and things, the age groups actually is a bit more swayed towards the lower age groups. Male, female, reasonable split, which was good. Representation from disabled residents was very strong and correlated to census data as well. So we were pleased with that. And as you can see across the 10 policy areas, the lowest level of support was 74%. And that was a reflection of what people were telling us from the outset in the consultation. People came to the events and said, we know there's a problem and we want to do something about it, but the system is not working for me at the moment. I can't make the changes that you want me to make. So if we go through just a heat map showing you who responded, this again is only the online respondents. Very strong representation from people of Weldrake, and Hesse. We did ensure that through councillors and parish councils, information was sent out to all areas and all wards. So obviously that was picked up and we're very grateful to everyone who did respond. The blue dots on this map are events. So again, just to show the geographical spread of where we went, and the 30 in the middle is because we held or attended or were added to the agendas of more than 30 events. And those are things like the Deaf Cafe, where residents come from across the region and that kind of thing. So this will be familiar from the March report. And again, just to show you the level of support that we did receive, which we were very pleased with. First on the survey was some benchmarking questions. We actually asked some very interesting transport questions in 2021. And what we did was repeat some of those questions to see what difference there is. And as you can see, it's actually quite pleasing. There are people who have made changes already. People are reducing their car journeys, which is what we want them to do, and are expecting those journeys to change in the future. One of the most significant findings, though, on this graph, this is only the very and fairly serious indices, but as you can see, the three top issues remain. They are the same from 2021 to 2024, but there's a significant increase in the health and the social issues that transport affect. So people feeling restricted, people not having access to jobs and employment, or feeling cut off from family and friends is quite a concerning rise, actually, and is one of the key factors that we need to address in how we deliver the transport network to alleviate some of those issues. Congestion, air pollution, and impacts on climate change were the three that had changed a little bit, but were still the biggest issues that people reported to us. And I think that, feeling restricted risen from 10% to 22% is actually quite a significant issue for us to look at. Next then, so looking at each of the 10 policy areas, what we've done is we haven't gone through in this presentation every single question because we'd be here for days possibly. But we've looked at all the different indicators that people gave us and tried to plot what differences there might be. So in policy area 1, one of the questions was around accessibility and different elements of accessibility. So not just physical accessibility, but safety, differences between male and females, all this kind of thing. Cycle parking locations was an interesting one because, of course, we can't expect anybody to cycle more in the city if they've got nowhere to put their bike when they get there. So mapping out where different groups are asking for things. There's broadly the correlation, as you can see, but there's some more work to be done on mapping why those differences are there. Are they areas of major employment? Are they near schools and colleges and things? Why are people of different genders telling us different results? Junctions, and this is what James was talking about in terms of pinch points in areas. I think we all expected this to be the picture from across the wider CYC area. Huge concentration in the middle, but also some significant areas. Elvington, for example, down in the bottom right-hand corner. Acombe Road, I think, is that 21. But again, any ward council that's interested in looking at results for your area, we can pick those out and zoom into maps for you. I'd be happy to do that. City centre, spot the inner ring road. It's very obviously one of the issues, and obviously a lot of those concentrations and clusters are projects that are already being addressed. So Station Gateway, for example, but there are definitely areas where we need to look really quite closely at how accessible those junctions are. Are they allowing people to do what they want to do, or do we need to make some changes there? Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. The number in each circle,
Yes,
does that
sorry.
reflect the number of people who have said this
Yes.
area is a problem?
Yes, so we used a tool called Citizen Space, which allow people to drop pins on a map. So, for example, 19 at top of Ouse Bridge is that 19 people have said they have a problem there. And when you zoom in, you can identify, and then you can actually click on that person and you can read what they've said and who they are and all this kind of stuff, which is why this has taken so long, because there's so many rabbit holes I've just disappeared down with all the data. But yes, so those show clusters of people that have identified a problem.
Quick one. Could you just,
Very, very briefly, you don't just jump in.
it's not a
okay?
question. Could you just give a brief explanation of what you mean by accessible design perspective?
You want to do that, Julian?
Sorry, yes, I'll do that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Julian Ridge. I'm the Sustainable Transport Manager and I look after transport strategy. So accessible design perspective in this sense is crossings which are difficult for people who have accessibility needs to cross. So they might be crossings where it is difficult to get across the road in the allotted amount of time, or the approach might be difficult. Certain people might find sight lines difficult. There might be barriers and bits of guardrail that people feel get in the way. There are a whole host of reasons why people might feel a junction is unsatisfactory.
We just follow up on that. We did in fact allow most of these questions to have free text comments. So we do have a lot of the very descriptive information from people that we're looking at and going through and making sure that people say, well, this is a problem because it's not just they're dropping pins on a map. So again, that's the data that we've been really going through in the last few weeks. This is an interesting one. Buses and trains being accessible to people in both a physical sense and a practical sense, in terms of, is information readily available, are timetables accurate, are all the different issues that, you know, from making a decision to catch a train or a bus. And you'll notice that where we've plotted out the respondents who indicated they have a disability, quite an obvious difference. It's very interesting. We're going more into the comments that were given on this question as well. Most of the issues are actually really quite similar, especially trains around the lifts being broken at the railway station and these kinds of issues. It's probably also important to note we've fed a lot of this data into other teams that are working on related issues. So, for example, the MEMA consultants who are working on the accessible city centre workshops and work, they've been sent the redacted data as well. So we're tying up all the information that we've got from all the different respondents to be able to pull together a true picture of the whole city. But as you can see, you know, late, cancelled, expensive, crowded, unreliable, all featured heavily among people with a disability and people without. So obviously something to address. Improving access, again, another interesting difference in men and women. And I'm going into a bit more detail on this at the moment behind the scenes. I think one of the important things is around safety and perceptions of safety and being around at night and all this kind of thing, and where there are particular issues that we need to address. And you can see that cluster in this very city centre for women. So again, we're able to look at the detailed comments on those and why those pins would be dropped in those particular areas. The lines, by the way, are routes that people take. So where you've got the dot in the middle, that is just an indicator of one response, and the line is the route people want to take. We asked 3 different questions on pedestrian crossings and how we can improve those. So priority areas, i.e. those real high traffic, high volume spots that people use frequently. This shows the whole CYC area, and as you can see, obviously city centre is predominantly, but Hackspur and Strensall do feature highly as well. And then we zoom in a bit more, and you can see some of those radial routes featuring, again, which is interesting in terms of where people are trying to walk and cycle more, but perhaps facing challenges because of the infrastructure that's not supporting them. And then this maps people who said they have a disability and the areas in the centre of town where they are not able to do what they want to do. And I think the Gillygate Lord Mayor's Walk is that 10 top middle, York Station, Nunnery Lane, Blossom Street, all feature very highly, which we did expect to see, but at least we can now see directly what those problems are. And again, look at the comments that people have said and read specifically why they have an issue there. We also looked, so this is just zooming into the other 2 maps more closely, about specific clusters. And again, those match pretty much what people with a disability said as well to us. So there's a definite areas where pretty much everybody has an issue, really. So definitely places to address. That 71 is obviously Blossom Street, which is a significant area, and 59 is Lord Mayor's Walk, Gillygate. We then moved on to policy 3, shaping healthy places. And it was really interesting, actually. We had, those are pretty much the extent of the comments. Everybody said pretty much the same thing. And obviously, Oxford's an interesting example because it's been through a lot with its local transport strategy. Anywhere with the tram network, and a few European examples, but we were really keen to understand where people's experiences have been better and what we can take from those cities and learn from them. Now, in making places to live feel inclusive, safe and healthy, we were interested in this, and this goes back a little bit to the benchmarking questions of transport not just being about moving people around, but the areas people live in and how they feel in those areas. I think improving the pavement services just came in second, but very closely second to improving cycle routes and ensuring key services at district centres is obviously very, very important to people. And again, we can look at some of the comments that were made on that one. No, clicker's not working. Clicker's bust. Not working. Anyway, thank you. And again, for this next one, we went back to cross-referencing different communities. With people with a disability, the quality of road and pavement services came out very highly, as it did with people who said they don't have a disability. So there's clearly significant issues for us to address. So the top 3 came out the same. There were slight differences in crossing points, visibility and lines of sight. And then there's something else, again, other comments that people made that we can go into more detail on. Yeah, shall I wave it? Do a this map, we were very interested to just plot out, thank you, areas where people have told us, this is based on their postcodes. So this is predominantly where people live, what their issues are with the bus network. So the blue dots are reliability, and the red dots are where people say they have a problem with their routes. And some very obvious clusters here of problems in general with the network. Reliability at the ends and beginnings of some of the routes that going in and out of town. And then obviously is a significant cluster within the city centre as well. We also wanted to ensure that we showed you some of the comments that we received, and I'll let you all, thank you very much, have a minute to read some of these, because I think we've selected ones from across a wide range of respondents here. I think the thing to highlight, the bottom right-hand corner, is the college tutor that I met, who said that there's really quite a significant problem for a lot of students, and having to choose whether you go to work or your child goes to college shouldn't be an issue. And is one of the things we are helping with the BSIP project, so the £1 single bus fare at the moment, which is helping. And I'm actually talking to the college this week to try and get some case studies that we can use of students that have been helped through the ticketing work that we've been doing with BSIP. The primary school people in the middle who said, well, we need more people on buses. They were 9, and I sort of said to them, would you like a job to come and work with us? Because they just got it. The children and the young people that we spoke to really just did understand things. We're also grateful to the industries that we talked to. We had a couple of sessions with the tourism industry and with freight and taxis and those kind of people. So we've been able to include some of the responses here. And then going into a bit of detail about, well, okay, what if we did certain things, would that impact on people? And asking, you know, what's basically stopping people use buses, and how can we encourage more people to do that? Introducing dedicated priority routes for buses and sustainable transport is obviously a key BSIP deliverable. And I think it's 72%, you know, if we can make sure that the BSIP project delivers for those people, we would have quite a significant shift away from private car use, hopefully, for those who are able to leave their car at home. And again, I'll give you a minute to read some of these, but this is around arriving at train station and how we can encourage people to not drive to the train station. I should say as well, we've used all comments verbatim, so any spelling mistakes, etc., are not mine. But we felt it was important to just literally copy and paste those in. And then moving on. Policy 5. I think the interesting thing here was these comments that we have included. Some of the negative comments we received, because it's probably important to reflect that there were people who did say, well, you know, everything's fine, I want to drive my car everywhere, I'm fine, thank you very much. And to get across the picture that we are trying to ensure that we deliver in the right way for everybody. I think some of the comments do include specific points of interest. Some of them, again, when we've gone into them, are just kind of not the anti kind of cyclist kind of mentality, but some people did say, well, what's wrong with driving everywhere? We've always done it, why can't we carry on? And we're also very interested in finding out how we can encourage more EV chargers. And again, a good distribution across the whole region. But when we go into this map, so there's a 19 on the left and a 15 on the right, which are Monk's Cross and Clifton Moor. So the significant trip generators of those shopping centres, where people said if you do install chargers there, they're more likely to use them. And then we looked at some, again, back to some specific sort of examples of what we might be able to do, including larger and heavy vehicles in the clean air zone. Again, very strong support for those, and strong support for ensuring that any new housing and major developments install infrastructure. I had a really interesting email from a family who'd moved to a new development and had wanted specifically to cycle and use an EV charger, and the developer had never got around to installing the EV chargers or the cycle routes. So that's actually something we've been able to follow up and try and, you know, help individually. But there are people who are trying to do what we want them to do. It's just at the minute the situation doesn't allow them to. This is a really interesting one. Inner Ring Road, obviously in those earlier maps, all those clusters and pinch points are basically a map of the Inner Ring Road. So we weren't surprised to see that 67% of people disagreed or strongly disagreed that the Inner Ring Road is currently fit for purpose. And it's just what we can do about that is the interesting point. 20 for that. Residence parking zones. A good level of support, actually. And I think obviously any scheme that comes forward would have its own consultation and things as well. But to see that people recognise that they can help and encourage more people to not own a car or own a car when needed. 42% of people agreed or strongly agreed. And then parking provision within new developments. So working with developers to reduce the impact of cars. Again, very strong support, which I think reflects the earlier questions as well. Freight and logistics. I was really interested in that bus driver one, because obviously, you know, on the ground doing this day in, day out, their views were really, really important. We did have a lot of comments about delivery vehicles parking on pavements, struggling to get by. That affects people with disabilities as well. Just makes it generally more dangerous for everybody, frankly. We did ask about where people either live near areas of freight distribution or work in the freight industry. So we included the comment from the person who lives on Hull Road and obviously experiences a lot of vehicle movements past their house. And then cargo bikes across York, some strong support, which was nice to see. I think it's in discussions that we had with some of the freight industry, they said basically we've sort of worked out systems as best we can. We're commercial operators. We don't want to go anywhere that we don't need to go already. But what we do as a council to encourage in very city centre or in the outer regions the use of cargo bikes for last mile deliveries and that kind of thing. And then reducing the weight limit on key roads, again, some very strong support for that as well. And what we can do is we can map the people who strongly agreed to that one against their postcodes and their ages and all this kind of thing to see where the clusters are of people that experience difficulties with very, very large and heavy vehicles. Yes, enforcement. We were looking at how enforcement of traffic rules isn't helping people make the right decision in terms of whether a pavement or a road surface or road markings are actually up to standard, and what problems there are that mean that people are making the wrong decision, shall we say. And again, across the whole area, as you'd expect. We went into more detail. I was particularly interested, I think that's Acombe Road along the top left out to the west, which we also received a lot of emails about in terms of safety for children going to primary school and crossing the road and everything. But again, those radial routes showing out quite well as well. Traffic breaking the rules, again, pretty much everywhere where you would expect. Huge cluster in the city centre. I think I went in, yes, so looking more at the city centre itself. Again, very, very similar to where people have already told us they experience issues. So where we map these against each other, the same roads come up over and over again, the same junctions come up where people are telling us they've got problems. Oh, sorry, it's gone on. Monitoring the network. This was an opportunity for people to tell us where they feel we should focus our efforts with the resources and the capacity that we've got. And again, included some of the negative comments here because it's only fair to do that because we did receive them. But the general feeling was make buses work better and you will ensure that everything else can flow out of that. My last slide will be the close today. So again, we ask people, what can we do that will have the greatest impact with the money that we've got available? Schemes that make cycling safer, improve reliability of buses, and ease traffic congestion. Which are all things Julian's going to talk about, I think. So any questions? I'm very conscious that's a whistle-stop tour, but happy to take questions.
Thank you for that, Lara. If I may, I'd like to propose that we have a quick 5-minute refreshment break, because I'm guessing we'll end up speaking for another hour uninterrupted otherwise. So we'll have the break now and then continue with this, if that's okay. Thank you ever so much. Cheers. Okay, colleagues, we'll resume tonight's meeting. So we've just had a summary from Lara of the consultation responses. And I believe Julian has some more slides of his own to share, and then we'll have a sort of open discussion. I'm sure members might want to ask officers different types of questions related to their remit. So if you want to continue, Julian, that'd be grand.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, Councillor Taylor. I think I probably ought to start by paying tribute to Lara, really, and the amazing work she's done pulling together all those stats into a tremendous, not only pulling them into a tremendous presentation, but also the huge amount of work that was involved gathering that information, and, you know, events attended in the evenings and on Saturdays and outside work time, and whizzing all over the city collecting things and traveling on the mobile library and things like that. It really is an enormous body of material, and as she says, we can cut it lots and lots of ways, and we're always very pleased to go into the detail with anyone who has a particular interest in their ward or a particular mode or a particular junction or area. We are very happy to talk about that. So next slide. It's the first time I've used this, so let's see how we go. Oh, right. Brilliant. Right. 25 years or so of experience in generating transport planning, working for councils and consultancies and so on and so forth, has told me that different transport solutions have different levels of ease and delivery and public acceptability. So I suppose what I'm going to say is particularly pointed at a particular enabling measure we could take forward if members wish us to do that. I think before I go into that in detail, it's worth saying that the work that Lara's done has identified enormous numbers of potentially quite easy improvements we can make, improvements to junctions, places where we can provide benches, and so on and so forth. And no doubt they will be rolled into programmes as we take that forward. But I don't think we can really escape from the fact that if you want to make deeper changes to a transport network, you have to do it if you're going to address some more fundamental issues. And I think there's no doubt in my mind that the information we've collected in our big transport conversation suggests that there are some fundamental issues we have to address. And it also indicates, and Lara put up a slide about this, that perhaps there is a public readiness to consider some deeper changes than those we've made before. And it was very clear in the feedback that people were prepared to consider reallocating road space to active modes and public transport. And they did accept that if better bus priorities were provided, they would use the bus service more. So next slide. So what I wanted to do, I mean, in a democratic context, you ask people what they want and they tell you what they want. And sometimes that matches with real technical evidence, sometimes it doesn't. So we've run a series of checks really to make sure that what we are told in our big transport conversation tessellates with the reality of, or the facts on the ground, as it were. Now, this, again, I'm going to use this for the first time. So right, the laser pointer. So this map on the left is a map of where we see pedestrian casualties in York. The map on the right is the same map for cycle casualties. What we can see is that there are clearly clusters. The pedestrian cluster is focused here, which actually is both ends of Ouse Bridge. They are the worst pedestrian casualty clusters in the city, whilst we do have other isolated instances, that's Blossom Street, for example. The worst clusters we see are at both ends of Ouse Bridge. It's actually a very similar story for cycles. This cluster is Blossom Street, Ousbridge is there. That's Monkgate, Heath Green, and that is Piccadilly, I think. So there is a real tessellation between.
Sorry, Julian. Councillor Burton, do you have something to say or ask?
So where was that last one? Sorry. And I just wondered, it says 2018. So that's the figures. These are the figures from then.
So these are figures taken from a scoping exercise that we had done for our local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. So they reflect, I think, accidents in the 5 years to 2018. But if you ran that with present data, you wouldn't see much of a difference. These are recognised areas. So they do correlate with the places that people said it is difficult to cross the road in this area in the information that Lara has collected. So there's a very close correlation.
Councillor Merritt, very briefly. Sorry, Julian.
I think Julian misdescribed to the Blossom Street, the one next to the nearest to it is the bridge one. The one you described as Bridge is actually Bootham Jungle.
I think that's right. I'm looking at my notes actually here, which I should have been looking at first place. So that is Blossom Street. That is Ousbridge, Gillygate, Monkgate, and Monkgate Roundabout and the Gyratory, and that's Heath Green.
If it can wait till, can it wait, or is it really helpful to ask it now?
Is this any time? It's 24 hours.
Yes.
It's not at a particular time. That
No,
these-
it is
yeah.
all casualties as they are.
Yeah.
This is information that we collect from the police
Right.
using their statistical forms, which record accidents on the highway. If you look at bus reliability, normally there would be a slide looking at bus reliability, which has disappeared. But I can assure you I have it here. And we'll put it in the slide pack that is circulated after this. But bus reliability is also poorest on the stretch of road between Rougier Street, over Ousbridge and Tower Street. That's the poorest location for bus reliability in the city. And I think one thing that's also important to point out is that whenever we've talked to our colleagues in North Yorkshire, they've pointed out that one of the biggest barriers to having reliable buses in North Yorkshire is the difficulties that they experience going through York. So traffic congestion experienced by a bus in York will also lead to that bus being late in Malton or Harrogate or Selby. In terms of air quality, we also see a real correlation between the problems where we have air quality difficulties and the problems flagged up as problematic in our big transport conversation. So again, we have serious problems with air quality in Blossom Street. We have 3 air quality management areas in the centre of York, and they are at Blossom Street, Rougier Street, and Gillygate. So in many ways, none of this is new. The last administration recognised this, as Andy Gorn said, in a lot of the work that they did. So in 2021, they produced the centre mobility strategy, and that recognised that there were priorities in terms of providing mobility, and that strategy saw providing mobility for walking and mobility aids to access all areas throughout the city centre. It saw cycling, e-scooters, buses and blue badge parking as being provided around the Foot Streets area, but not within it. And it saw cars pushed out to the inner ring road. And to some extent, that was a response to the motion that the council passed in 2019 regarding vehicle use in the city centre. And it went on to inform some of the policy work that we already know about, particularly the development principles behind Castle Gateway. There have been various other policies which fundamentally recognise that there is a need for change in the city centre. The climate change strategy of 2022, again passed by the last administration, recognised that the change to electric vehicles was not enough to deliver the 71% reduction in CO2 emissions from York required, and that could only be achieved through modal shift from cars to cycle, walking and bus. And again, the version of that strategy, which was published as part of the local plan examination library, is very clear that that equates to a reduction in car miles of about 20%. Local plan policy SS3 from 2018, that was published by the administration before the last administration, has an overt policy to prioritise active modes and public transport in the city centre. And for years, public health policies followed by the council have encouraged active travel because of its tremendously beneficial effect on physical health and mental well-being. So to some extent, there's a bit of convergent evolution going on here. We have the council trying to make improvements to place in York, particularly through schemes like station frontage and Castle Gateway. And we also have a need to make transport changes to achieve things like our climate change strategy and make the city be able to absorb some of the growth which is predicated in the local plan. We have measures to improve active travel and public transport, and they are key enabling measures to achieving some of the health outcomes that we want to see, and also around if active travel and public transport are improved, it also contributes to achieving outcomes around affordability and ensuring universal access to opportunity. And again, they are fundamental parts of the new council plan. To achieve that, there's a necessity to provide more road space to sustainable modes. And the paper that we wrote to support this session makes it very clear that in other places in the world where this has been attempted, including many places in the UK, that approach has been fundamental to doing something successful. By providing more road space to sustainable modes, we can also achieve associated urban realm improvements, particularly around regeneration, improved placemaking, and improving accessibility. What we've seen elsewhere where things like this have been attempted, we've seen car traffic levels fall and active modes increase. And as I've already said, that's led to improvements in outcomes, for example, health, accessibility, reducing noise and air pollution. So there's quite a big question, I think, within all this that York needs to think about how it's going to answer. So if it takes the view that it's necessary to improve place and improve active mode provision, where is it going to do that? Where do we want to improve place as an authority? And if you are going to improve place by providing more space for active modes and public transport, where do you provide that? And when do you provide that? So I think in doing that, there's obviously a focus on the city centre. The city centre is the focus, as I've already shown, it's the focus of our active and sustainable transport networks. But it is also where we see the clusters of accidents, poor bus reliability, and much congestion. And I think really you have to think about sort of three potential routes through the city centre, which are broadly informed by the bridges. So you have what I've called Inner Ring Road West, which is Blossom Street, Station Road, Queen Street, over to Museum Street, Gillygate and Lord Mayor's Walk. Obviously, it's a route that goes right through the heart of the city centre. It is of enormous amenity value and tremendous historic significance. You have a clear central route which penetrates the Inner Ring Road at the moment. That's made up of Rougier Street and Micklegate, leading over to Ousegate, Clifford Street and Tower Street. And then you have a third sort of sector, which could be thought of as Monkgate, and the gyrator is around Monkgate, Foss Islands Road, Paragon Street, the route over Skeldergate Bridge and Nunnery Lane. What you see, if you look at how these routes are actually used, the characteristics of how they're used is actually fundamentally quite different. This information is based on the programme of bridge counts that City of York Council has. In fact, we've been doing bridge counts on these bridges since 1965. It's a piece of data which is absolutely wonderful. It tells you a tremendous amount about how transport has changed in the city. These figures are taken from 2022. What I've done here is I haven't counted vehicles, but I've counted people, because a transport strategy is not about moving boxes, it's about moving people and maximising the movement of people, which I suppose is accessibility in its most pure sense. So what you see in this...
Sorry, Julian, we have another query.
So just if I might have missed it, but IRR, what does that mean?
Inner Ring Road.
Thank you.
Yes. So
Acronyms are bad.
Sorry about that. Yes, I wanted the graph to be not have too much wording at the bottom of it. But I might change that on when it's circulated publicly. So Inner Ring Road West, that's the count over Lendal Bridge. Central is the count over Ouse Bridge. Inner Ring Road East is the count over Skeldergate Bridge. What you see is there's a fundamental difference in how they're used. The light blue bar at the bottom is the number of people travelling over each bridge by car. And what you can see from that is Skeldergate carries the most car users by an absolute mile. It carries twice as many as either of the other two bridges. Yellow is bus users. We have assumed a number of people on each bus, but you can see from this that the central route, Ouse Bridge, carries tremendously more bus users than either of the other two. And in fact, bus users, I think, is probably the largest user category on that bridge. The green bar above that is cyclists. Inner Ring Road West, in the shape of Lendal Bridge, carries about the same. In fact, that carries the most cyclists, but the central route carries very similar numbers. There are far fewer cyclists over Skeldergate Bridge, and then the dark blue at the top is pedestrians. So you can see that Ouse Bridge is critical for carrying the number of pedestrians. It carries far more pedestrians than either of the other two. Lendal Bridge is pretty close. Skeldergate Bridge carries vastly fewer. One thing that's particularly interesting about this is if we were looking at a graph that was simply a count of vehicles, we would see that the central route has the fewest vehicles on, but actually, if you look at people, it carries the most people. So next slide. There are obviously a number of changes that we are also pushing forward in the city centre. To some extent, these link up across the city centre and across the central route. But it's worth pointing out that they are the station gateway, which is proposed to have a turning loop for buses in it. There is obviously the Castle Gateway regeneration. That again has another proposed turning loop for buses at the Skeldergate Bridge Tower Street junction. The electrification of the bus network has made a tremendous change to the emissions profile of the buses in use in central York and vastly reduced nitrogen oxide concentrations in part of the city. And obviously we have the changes that were made in Coppergate a couple of years ago, where we have different bus routings. And there is also an expectation that with the Castle Gateway regeneration, there will be a substantial reduction in the amount of parking on Castle Car Park. So, and that this slide shows those changes on a mapped base, and you can see quite clearly, 1, 2, 5, and 3 form a bit of a golden thread through the city, connected up by a central route. So finally, this is my expectation of how things are likely to change. I think with the expectation of the reduction in car traffic on the central route that would come from removing or reducing the number of spaces at Castle Car Park, one would expect a reduction in vehicle trips on that route. The putting in the turnaround facility at the Skeldergate Tower Street junction would expect you would expect an increase in bus routings on the route, because you would be able to run buses on both directions on Tower Street and Clifford Street, and remove some or maybe all of them from Skeldergate. So you end up there with one route being predominantly much more focused on sustainable transport than the other two. And I think the question really for this group is whether they are content to ask officers to start working up a strategy which looks at how that route, the use of that route for sustainable modes, can be capitalised upon and maximised. So that was the end of my presentation, but I don't know whether you want to discuss or question. I hand it over to you.
Thank you for that, Julian. I'm only smiling because this is such a big thing, and who knows where this discussion will go. But that's what we're here for. So I guess members, I'm sure you've all got various questions that you'd like to ask. Don't forget we've got the soon to be relevant executive member with us as well, Councillor Ravilius. One thing I will say is, mindful of time, really clamp down on speeches, colleagues. Let's stick to questions. Nobody questions your passion or any of your sort of views. Keep it limited to questions, otherwise we'll be here much longer than we already will be. So who wants to go first? Councillor Stewart and Councillor Healy.
I don't think I've ever been more fearful of a chair than you tonight, Councillor Taylor. You're absolutely formidable, Thor.
Oh, get on with it.
I just ask one question on this slide, if I can, which it might just be me, but when you talk about in the future, Julian, what is the future? Is that,
So the future assumes we make a couple of foreseeable changes. So the first of those is the removal of some of the car parking on Castle Car Park. The second is we put the turnaround facility on the Tower Street Skeldergate Bridge roundabout, which allows us to route buses off Skeldergate Bridge and Skeldergate and run them in both directions on Tower Street and Clifford Street.
Okay, so it's about those. It's not a particular 5 years hence or something like that. Okay.
No, it assumes we complete those two schemes, but it doesn't assume a timescale.
Okay, and my second question was very early on in Lara's slides. We had all the various things about people's changes in behaviour, and for me, the number of people that intended to reduce their car usage significantly, or whatever it was actually, quite low. Because if somebody asked me, do you want to reduce your car use? I'd say, yes, I do want to, because I want to be in a position where other things like buses are better. But in my view, people would naturally sort of see that as a, look, I do want to walk to the shops more, rather than they'd almost see it as a sort of their behaviour being good. So were you expecting those sorts of levels? I mean, I suppose we've got this whole quarter of people that said that the environment doesn't matter at all to them broadly. Is that sort of thing? Were you expecting those levels? Or were they a bit disappointing in terms of the number of people who maybe are not looking to be part of the car reduction at all?
It's a good question. I think that level probably represents where we have got to with the current network, and people aren't expecting, if the network does not change for them, they would not expect to be able to reduce their car use anymore, because the network doesn't support them walking or cycling or catching the bus anymore. If we introduce changes, but obviously we weren't putting that, we were putting the policies out for consultation. So we're saying at the moment, do you expect to be able to reduce it any further? And those responses came back as no. But now what we're looking at is if we implement changes, could people actually make more of a change? I think we've seen some very positive movement by people, but we may be at the sort of critical point where, if Julian agrees, this is the point which people have done all they can individually, and now we need to make infrastructure changes to support more change. Would be my interpretation of it anyway.
That's my interpretation too. But I also think that a really critical thing is, firstly, the phrasing of the question, which I think was asking people within a 5-year timescale. So it was time limited. The second thing I think is really important is that there is obviously churn in the population all the time. And so in York, we have, young people coming here to study and, people leaving the city and so on and so forth. So, one thing I'm very conscious of with transport strategy, if you have a transport strategy for 10 years, actually at the end of that 10 years, it's dealing with a different cohorts of people and they have different travel habits, and there is an opportunity to influence those through what you do.
Thank you for that. Can I please ask that you can both speak up a bit more when you do answer questions? Sorry to be pedantic, I'm just struggling. It could just be me. Cheers. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Could we go to the slide that has the sort of map that shows the central, east and west routes?
No, I think you'll have to wake the presentation up again. I can't change it with the flicker.
Yeah, there you go. Being a non-transport person, given the fact that the central route connects up at both ends to the east and the west route, wouldn't an obvious thing to do would be to ban cars from that route then?
That's the press headline for tomorrow.
Well, as I said, being a non-transport person.
I'll answer that. I think that is the question for you to consider as members, whether the way to achieve your strategic objectives and address some of the technical issues that we've highlighted, like the accident clusters at both ends of Ouse Bridge, can be addressed by that. And I think part of that is bearing in mind that some of those, particularly the accident stats, that's not about accessibility, it's about a different issue.
I've got yes, James.
Sorry, could I just come back on that? I think just to respond to Councillor Healy's sort of proposal, I think all right, sorry, question. The art is in stopping it being used as a cut through. If that was your intention, it's making sure that you get the balance right between people who need access to those bits of the city in a car and those people who don't, in effect, trying to discourage usage rather than encourage usage.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Vassy, then Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. There is a question at the end of this. Feel confident.
I mean, you were good at these, so
feel confident there is
keep
one.
it slick, please.
I feel I have to speak because I've been a councillor for 20 years on and off, well, for 12 years, over a 20-year period. And I've seen LTPs come and go. I've seen them all talk about modal shifts and all of that stuff. I've seen transport emissions flatline over that period. And here we are again. I know all the people involved are decent and dedicated, but I suggest to you that the recent peer review that went before the executive is critical in understanding where we are here. That review says in a number of different places that this city over a long period of time has continuously failed to raise its head above minutiae and look at strategy. And that's what I still see here. It's like going to a cinema to see an exciting film and sitting down. And instead of seeing the film, you're given a questionnaire on what kind of lenses you think the filmmakers should be using. That's what I see here. Delivering projects starts with a vision. When we ask the public, what kind of curbs do you like? We're not really moving forwards with a strategy, and we're never going to get to one. And it saddens me hugely because what that survey shows, 85%, 90% of the public get it on all the major issues that we've consulted them on, and they've got it for years. So instead of endlessly rehearsing the problems, asking them complex questions, let's advance a strategy. And I'm saying this for the new executive member. She will have my support if she's bold and advance a strategy that people can respond to. This is our plan. And my question at the end of all of this, so you know I have one, Chair.
Of course.
Why should we be surprised that cycling and public transport happens more in the city centre than on the ring road, when all the villages have got rubbish and poor bus services and cycle routes? That's not leading us anywhere. I'd love to know why we should be surprised by it and how it's going to give us a proper strategy that can deliver the change everyone around this table wants. Thank you, Chair.
I'm not sure there is a question, but I'll respond anyway. I think the point I would make is the executive adopted the vision and the strategy in March. So the report that went to March the executive adopted a vision, it adopted a strategy and 10 policy themes that underpin that. So that this is the next stage beyond that. Maybe I should have made that clearer at the beginning, but that principle has been accepted. It was endorsed through the consultation as reported to executive in March. This is very much about the detail that sits behind that in terms of how we deliver that strategy, not what the strategy is.
Thank you. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions around some of the sort of underpinning information. There was quite a bit of work done on a local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. I just wondered to what extent any of the work done through that process will feed into what comes to executive, or have you found that the priority walking and cycling routes identified in the LC WIP process are replicated through, or those priority routes are sort of supported by what's come out of this exercise? That would be helpful, just I suppose for a reassurance that that work hasn't been wasted. Secondly, the report talks about a crucial ingredient of successful projects as being careful planning and engagement. And through nobody's fault, sometimes we don't get it right as an authority in terms of planning and delivery. And as someone whose ward includes Tadcaster Road, I'd be delighted to take part in a any kind of wash-up discussions around what's worked well, what's worked less well. But I think crucial around careful planning and engagement prior to and during the delivery of a scheme is going to be absolutely critical in terms of, if we've got people on board, keeping them on board so that they feel a sense of ownership and an ability to not micromanage where a bus stop goes or where signalised pedestrian crossing is, but so that we can demonstrate as an authority that we do learn. You know, we learn and we grow and we adapt, because that's what we should be doing as an organisation that's sort of keen to deliver a strategy that, you know, from what you said, Julian, you know, is informed by a number of administrations over a number of years, and there is a degree of consensus, I think, and it's trying to build on that. So just on the LC WIP and the Tadcaster Road lessons learned points, it'd be useful to get your thoughts, please.
Okay, yeah, very, very happy to do that, and they're very valid questions. So in terms of the LC WIP, that will form part of the material that we take to executive in June. So we will be publishing that, but the recommendations of that exercise have been taken into account in what we are presenting here. But there is always a choice about how much you present. And in fact, the casualty maps that I showed were from one of the scoping documents, the LC WIP. So you do take that material. In terms of planning and engagement, I think yes, we would welcome an opportunity to do a wash-up session on Tadcaster Road. But at a more general level, a lot of what we've presented and we've discussed has been informed by something that was formed by the administration in October, which is a group of transport experts who we are using to help us to formulate some of these plans. Now, a lot of these experts have been involved in numerous pieces of work elsewhere in the UK and abroad, and have particular specialisms looking after people who have particular needs of the transport network. So, for example, we have two mobility consultants, including a wheelchair user on that group. One thing that they've told us about taking any scheme forward is that engagement and co-design is absolutely crucial to successfully seeing that scheme through. And one of the things that will come out of the movement and place framework that we will also be bringing to executive in June will be some guidance on how we address that. But rest assured, it's an essential part of what we do.
James, I see your hand, but Councillor Villiers, you indicated you might want to jump in on this as well.
Yeah, thank you. I don't mind. Do you want to? Yeah, I'll go.
No, you're on.
Yeah.
Might as well.
Yeah. So, yeah, really appreciate the concerns you're raising about strategy and big picture. Just to say, the officers, James, Julian, and Lara, the work they've done is immense, and it's still going on. So there's things being produced at the moment, and I'm a bit sad we haven't. It's just time pressure. We haven't managed to put it all in front of you tonight. So there is more to come, and that big picture thinking is on the way. So those supporting documents will come with this transport strategy. We've got consultants at the moment helping us draw up the approach to what we're calling the movement and place plan. And what that means is recognizing that different parts of the city have different characters and need different attention in terms of some places are prioritized for flow of people or vehicles. Some places are where you shop and you do leisure. Some places are where we live. Some are greenways where we relax. And at the moment, the city is just, we drive everywhere. So there are vehicles everywhere. And we are going to have to look at the city differently and say, this part of the city is for people who are mostly using sustainable modes. And this part of the city is prioritized for those heavy freight vehicles or buses. And that will, what we're looking at is asking those consultants in the approach of how do we phase that work? What do we do first? What do we do second? What are the quick wins? And we want to put together a programme that we can go to the mayoral combined authority with and say, look, this is going to be transformative for York. Because what we're really trying to do is not just move people around. It's about improving people's lives. It's about making health improvements that will really be transformative for the city. So there's more to come. And yeah, the question I think everyone's tiptoeing around tonight is one of our first interventions that we could look at, that the data is showing us from the consultation, is to do something on Ouse Bridge in terms of a traffic filter, to actually say Ouse Bridge is more of a space for people and for sustainable travel. We can look at that, we can explore it, we can see what impacts it would have. And I think that's really what I would value tonight, to hear from all of you about if that was a first step that seems to make sense and is the first phase of that movement and place plan. What would you think we need to look at? What are the questions we need to ask? Where do you see hazards or, things we need to think about?
Thank you. James, did you want to come in?
I think Councillor Villiers has well, I was probably going to steal her thunder, actually, in fairness. But I think part of the challenge of Tadcaster Road would be addressed by that approach to movement in place. So what purpose does Tadcaster Road serve varies along its length. And part of the challenge in delivering a transport strategy is how you balance that city narrative and those 10 policy themes and that strategic intent, which the city is very clearly signed up to, with the immediate impact it then has on residents who are affected by a scheme in their neighbourhood. So that movement and place plan is a way to articulate that and work with communities on that co-design to solutions within their community neighbourhoods, whilst also delivering the strategic intent.
Thank you, James. I've had a couple of hands. Are they new questions or supplementaries? I think they're supplementaries. Yeah, okay, well, you're on the list then in that case. Councillor Hook, you're next.
Wonderful. Don't you think that, because for me, I would love to see my wards, because my ward is so different from the inner city. It couldn't be further from the inner city. Unfortunately, we had very few responses, so we're not weighted as much as we should be. But we are so reliant. We've got a very elderly, aging population. Not many people can cycle as far as the centre of York. Not many people can cycle as far as even the ring road. So we're dependent on buses that do not come. So to pull up on what Mr. de Gorn has said previously, we need someone, don't you think, that will stand up to the bus companies that have got this managed decline mentality, where they say, oh, we haven't got enough passengers, so what do? We reduce the number of buses, we cut the services at the ends, which affect the villages, and then we'll make enough money to keep going. And then, of course, what happens? Fewer people use the buses because there's fewer buses, and it's a vicious spiral. And don't you think someone is needed, hopefully the new mayor of York and North Yorkshire or someone like that, that can actually stand up to the bus companies and inspire them to tell them that come 2030, everyone will be trying to get on a bus if only there was a bus there to get onto. And that's what we desperately need. And we certainly need it in my villages in order to become green. But I'm sure everybody else would love to, because in the city centre, yes, we've got congestion. But if you're a pedestrian, if I live near the city centre, I would walk everywhere because I could do it. I can walk a mile, I can walk 2 miles. I cannot walk 4 miles. So, especially not at night. So, do you think we're going to get that resource, which is really a person with the necessary charisma to stand up to the bus companies?
Councillor Villiers?
So
It's a good question.
You're absolutely right. The consultation, the thing that just jumped out was people in York want buses, rely on buses, and would travel more sustainably if they had access to better bus services. To do that, the crux is the congestion in York, which holds up the buses and makes them less reliable. We've got to address both of these things. And so that first idea of doing something on Ouse Bridge is very much about making buses more reliable. And that's not just buses in the city centre, because if you start making that little bit more reliable, that's the bit that's most congested. It has the ripple effect of actually buses coming from the villages outside are less held up. We then have to start looking at all the other places where buses get held up and making them more reliable so that they start to become profitable services. And we've got to exactly reverse what's been happening, where there's less and less passengers because they're less reliable. So yeah, agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Villiers. Julian had his hand up, and then I think Councillor Hook wants to come back.
Yes, I wanted to add that, part of my role increasingly involves working with both the Mayoral Combined Authority and my opposite members in North Yorkshire. They did a less detailed but not totally dissimilar consultation event themselves last year, which flagged up that buses were the principal area of concern in North Yorkshire as well. So I think I would like to think that formation of the Mayoral Combined Authority provides an opportunity to look at things more holistically, because the people in the villages around York, that some of them want to go to York, but some of them also want to go to Wetherby or, you know, other places. So it is an opportunity to try and look at some of these things at a more detailed level.
Thank you. Lara, do you want to jump in?
Just very quickly, Councillor Hook, I think one of the incredibly important things that we're doing through the BSIT work as well is addressing the fact that not everybody actually has a choice of how they're transported around and how they move around. There are young people who can't afford to learn to drive. There are older people who don't want to drive. There are people in rural areas and people in the inner city. And what we really must do is create a network that doesn't just look at the top level of people that can make a choice and can say, okay, I'll go down from 2 cars to 1 car, that we do offer transport for people of all descriptions in all ways, because there are some quite serious social impacts and implications of not having a transport network that does that. And that came through incredibly clearly in the consultation. So just wanted to add that, yeah.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hook, and then I think Councillor Stewart has a supplementary. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
And
that's
Councillor
great
Merritt.
to hear, because there are an awful lot of people, because as you get older, you can't walk so far, but then there's a lot of quick wins you could do to get them walking in their local area, because some people can't even leave their houses because they are trapped now because of the potholes and other things like that. But one thing that would solve the problem with buses as well would be if you didn't make them go all the way across town. No one ever goes, I've never gone to Stamford Bridge on the number 10 from Poppleton. Why doesn't it turn round at the railway station and go back again?
Yeah, by the way.
I think part of the schemes we've talked about is putting that turnaround loop in at the station and at Tower Street. So part of that work is to look at how we can make buses more efficient. And the bus companies support both of those schemes very strongly in terms of driving their reliability.
Councillor Stewart, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just on the point really that sort of Lara was making, and obviously we've got all these various categories of travel, but should we be putting community transport as a particular area of transport that we want to focus a great deal more on? Obviously, we've had the Dial and Ride task group ongoing, and one of the key findings that we've got of that is that York is simply not doing community transport as well as other areas. So should it be part of the transport sort of strategies and plans that we really do flag that up, because there is a world of difference between, you know, a conventional bus and a Dial and Ride type bus where, you know, you can use it a lot more easily if people with disabilities or older people. I think that could beneficially be something to put really at the forefront.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a constructive suggestion. And I would like to hope that this transport strategy work will have a serious look at the work of the task group and obviously the executive member.
Yeah, there is definitely work to be done there, looking at the options, and it, you know, community buses are one of a number of ways that you can fulfill some of those needs, and you know, different the needs of, I don't know, groups of people who work night shifts and need tailored transport are quite different from a rural area or people with mobility impairment. So there's a lot of there's a lot that we can look at.
Thank you. I think I've got a supplementary from Councillor Merritt, or was it a new set of questions? Okay, yeah, thank you. I'll put you at the back of the queue. It'll be worth the wait, I'm sure. Thanks for everyone's patience, by the way, that I've got a continuously long list here. Next, I've got Councillor Ben Burton.
To be honest, I think most of them around deliverability, so it's mostly been answered. So quite happy. If in terms of the question of do we want to look at that, then yes, I would be supportive of that. And every other measure that we can look at, because we need to get to a 20% reduction across the whole network. So that and much more, I guess. And I think what I'd hope to see is that we have a plan that's fully modelled and prepared by consultants, which I think was the question I was going to ask in terms of who we're working with to deliver that, which is quite clear now. But just detailed proposals of what that vision is for reducing it. And we're going to have to be quite ambitious, because obviously we've lost a lot of people who used to previously cycle who don't cycle anymore. So actually we've gone in the wrong direction, and we need to encourage people back onto that. But that encouragement is going to have to be quite tough, I think. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you, councillor Burton. Next on my list is councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, a couple of things, but in the same vein. Firstly, I think that it's all to do with this map, really. I absolutely see what councillor Healy suggested, and it was great of you to suggest it, councillor Healy. And I think that our executive member has made it very clear that she is very supportive of at least looking at and considering all of the options, including the one that you suggested. And I think that there is clearly something there, looking at the accidents, looking at the data around Ouse Bridge, and looking at the private car use over there anyway. That means that there is a question about how necessary it is for private cars to be using Ouse Bridge, except for perhaps blue badge holders. But that links into the wider question, and I would like to be a little bit perhaps unpopular here, because so much of this work is about reducing car use. It slightly concerns me that reducing car use may become all of what this work is about, and that may result in kind of a lack of equity for the different sides of the city. And my main kind of thing that I mean with this is, I think from the data that you looked at, you can see Lendal Bridge, for example, isn't being used that much by cars. It's got lighter traffic, but this yellow route is a key car access route for the city. It's also, as it happens, and you know, reflects this, probably the best designed bit of the inner ring road for cars. And I feel like there is a certain amount of flow to the traffic around there that you don't get in the other area. But I do think it's really significantly important that that is acknowledged and potentially even built on to balance out, because at the end of the day, this is a city built on a river. And I know, living in the west of York, that is how I have to get to the tip. We only have one tip, for example. There are some really key services and amenities that are car access based on Foss Islands Road that everyone in the city has a right to access, that often rely on cars and shouldn't be just easy to get to if you live on the east of the city or the north. I think it's just, so my question is just, how much are we taking that into account? Because what we could end up with is cutting off access for everyone in the west of York, basically, to those key amenities on the eastern side of the river.
Thank you, councillor Nelson. James?
I think just to reassure councillor Nelson, the concept of movement and place is to address exactly that point. So that concept that actually we're not just trying to stop people moving or moving in a certain way. What we're trying to make sure we do is consider it in the context of places people and the journeys people are trying to do. There will always be an element of car travel, and there will be an element of that is still required. What we want to do is make sure that we've got a plan for that, and that works, but alongside promoting other things as well. So I think, just to reassure you, it's about looking at it in that wider context. And just, we do have two tips, but I appreciate only one in the city centre.
I would just add, when we talk about achieving a reduction, when we talk about achieving a reduction in car traffic of 20%, it means that 80% of car trips would still take place. And we need to see it in that context. We're not talking about a reduction of 80%. We're assuming that for every 5 car trips that take place now, in 2030, 4 would take place.
That's a very good point. Thank you.
Councillor Nelson, you said you had a couple of things to raise.
The first one was to congratulate councillor Healy on his suggestion and
okay.
assure him that the executive will consider all options.
I think it was a question. It wasn't a suggestion of transport policy. Just to make that clear.
The public court will make their judgment. Yeah. No, fair enough.
I'm closest I heard it was a suggestion.
I was next in the queue that I've been noting, if colleagues will allow me. I have a lot of things to ask, but I won't do them all in one go. I think my overarching concern with this, as it is with a lot of these sort of strategies is what's going to make it matter, rather than it just be another document that is referred to when the next new strategy gets looked at. So Professor May in his participation section talked about the need for structure, targets, evidence and implementation plan. How far are we off that? Because that's the thing that's going to give this credibility. Otherwise, it's all just a big show, isn't it? And I don't think anyone wants it to be that, but it needs something that's going to lock it into the world around us.
I think there's two answers to that. The first bit is looking at the things that we can do immediately, and some of that has been about the discussion tonight. There are other things that we can do, as Julian alluded to, which are much simpler, which will make significant change. So starting to look at programs around that could be a relatively short-term win. What we've also talked about is the movement and place plan. I think some of these more perhaps fundamental changes, such as this one elsewhere, would need to come through that movement and place approach. So that is probably slightly further off. What we're hoping to take to June's executive is how we would approach a movement and place plan. So that will be a framework of the that our approach to it, because we need to be clear to decision makers and the public exactly what that is. And then that will be, I'm almost certain, an ask of the mayor early on to fund that movement and place plan for the city.
Okay, thank you. And you sort of touched on short-term wins, quick wins in your answer, and that was one of my other areas that I wanted to look at. The report refers to adjusting the timings on traffic lights as a potential quick win. What do we mean by that in terms of what types of adjustments are we looking at in terms of seconds? Are we looking at 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds? And then beyond that, what other quick wins are we looking at? Because being a cynical old head on the council now that I am, I read that and I thought, well, I've come across a million quick wins in my time and they seem excruciatingly difficult to make happen. So are there sort of areas that we can get excited about that will be seen as quick wins across all of York, beyond just playing with the traffic light signals, which is also important? I'm very easily excited. Councillor Avilius, and then officers, if you want to.
Yeah, so playing with traffic light signals, yes, we can definitely do that. We're looking at junctions like Blossom Street, where at the moment pedestrians have to wait more, I think it's 170 seconds or some huge amount of time. We can halve that by giving pedestrians the opportunity to cross twice within the cycle rather than once within the cycle. So there are some quite quick things that don't, or we're going to test. We don't think they will have a massive impact in terms of causing more congestion, but they will bring a lot of benefit to pedestrians. And yes, those are just fiddling with traffic lights, but it's about implementing that transport hierarchy where we're saying pedestrians are at the top, and at those junctions where people are sort of piled up and waiting for ages, penned in by some railings, we've got to release that. So that we can do, and we can do it really soon, and we want to get that going. The other quick win that I think we should be doing and we want to do is when we're doing highway resurfacing, or we've got sort of utilities works going on, we should use that as an opportunity to resurface back with improvements. So not just put it back to how it was, but, oh, is there an opportunity for some bus lane, for a cycle lane, for a better bit of pavement, for some sustainable urban drainage? So it's using those as opportunities to do something better. And then in that way, it saves us, we don't always have to look for huge schemes because we're just making the most of what we're doing already. The big schemes, the question I've challenged the consultants with when they're thinking about movement and place is it better to do things scheme by scheme by scheme by scheme, drip, 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 drip? Or should we be looking at a number of schemes that bring a sort of more holistic advantage to the whole city? And because we've got that opportunity to put something ambitious in front of the mayor, you know, in normal times, we can't afford to do anything more than the odd drip of funding coming in here and there. But if we put together something ambitious and say, look at the benefit that could bring, and yes, I'm not talking about we're doing this in a year. It's over a few years, but still, it's an opportunity to say, can we actually transform the way we move about the city? So the things we can do this year are small, but I think they will make quite a big difference, that people will notice that you won't have to wait so long to cross, and that we can do something with the resurfacing. But the more exciting opportunity to me is those schemes and how we phase them. And we need some help from consultants and real sort of detailed modelling work to get it right. But that's where the opportunity is.
Thank you, Councillor Villiers. Officers, might you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I think one thing that's really important to bear in mind, and actually it's shown on this map that we can all see, is there is a tremendous amount going on anyway. We talk about we don't make quick wins, but you know, let's face it, over the next 2-3 years, we're rebuilding the area in front of the station with better bus facilities and cycle lanes. We're putting a new access road through the middle of York Central, Haxby Station. We've got money in the bus service improvement plan to rebuild several of the park and ride sites and provide bus priorities. There's an awful lot that we are just doing, and we're just getting on with and delivering, and it forms part of existing programs. And a key part of the local transport strategy will actually be to make those points. You know, we're not starting from a point where we're not doing anything and we've got to start from a standing start. We already have lots of work and programs in place, which we are rolling out, and some of them you can see stuff being built on the ground.
If I may, Julian, very briefly, the comment I made was largely based on ward issues. There's an awful lot going on in the city centre, but in certain parts of the city, the same problems have remained for many years. But look, we can pick that up outside.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable point. We can always do more. But I think in terms of quick wins, there are, you know, things that we can do within existing funding streams, either because we've got the money for things like maintenance, or we can use it by tweaking projects slightly to deliver objectives in different ways. So, you know, some of the things that Councillor Villiers mentioned, like using maintenance scheme funding to make changes, are all things that we can look at within the quick wins category.
Thank you. Councillor Jane Burton, thanks for your patience.
Well, I'm going to draw on all your wisdom a bit, really, and Councillor Healy's suggestion as well. Sorry. I think it's Councillor Fenton said learning from the past. And I think, you know, if we follow the suggestion of closing the blue route to traffic apart and making it a bus gate, really, I think you've got to really remember what a disaster we had in the city centre when blue badge holders were excluded. And I think you've got to appreciate the need to allow people to still move around, use the car park that's going to be on the Eye of York area. Sorry, I've had to wait a long time, so I'm quite tired now. So, you know, I think you've got to remember we still need to move around. And I know that you've said that there are experts on mobility. It's a shame that we haven't heard back from any feedback from them yet in the group, because I'd be quite keen to hear back from them. And you think about the city centre access now and how many cars are going into the city centre with blue badges. There aren't that many going through. I don't think there would be that many going through in that area too. But so I think there's going to be a furore if we're stopped again. We don't want to stay at home. We want to go out. You know, that's why I'm on the council. And people supported me. People in my ward stopped me and said, we voted for you because of your stance on the blue badge issue. So I'm not going to stop there. And no one wants me to, and other people don't want to either. all the groups, and we see that it's there has to be improvements for health improvements, but we did not to the detriment of our health and our alienation and staying at home. And then finally, I hear that you're still writing your report, and I think that's good to hear, because in York we adopted a social model of disability, and it's disabled people. It's not people with disabilities. That's the American way of expressing about disabled people. It's quite important. It's society that is disabling us. It's schemes that are imposed upon us without the thought, without a consultation, that make us disabled. If we go somewhere where I went to a theatre in the West End a few years ago with my daughter, and I had a person to show me around to my seat. She came to me at the break to take me to the loo, a special loo that was set aside so I didn't have to queue with everybody else. And I had a really great evening because they thought about it, and they'd done something to make sure that my experience was a good one. Now, we don't want to go back to those prehistoric times where, you know, we're not thought about. So please, when we're writing reports, can we use the social model language, disabled people? It is important to do that, to remind people why we're using it. And I think with the new change of executive, I hope that we can have some disability equality training. I hope we can find, maybe the mayor will give us some money for that, so that we can all get up to speed on our language and usage and thought about all these things to do around disability. So I think that's about me done.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. I'd welcome a response to that.
Yeah, I think on the second point, absolutely noted, and we'll go away and review that. I think on the first point about accessibility, obviously it's one of the key tests now we're applying to every decision the council makes in terms of those principles. As I alluded to earlier, when this was first discussed, a total ban on cars probably isn't a workable solution, because some people, as I said at the time, will need access. Now, I think there is always a danger that us as transport people jump to, well, you can't do that because the legislation says X, Y, and Z. I think what we've got to work on is the principles we want to achieve, and then we pose the challenge to ourselves of how do we achieve that, rather than jump into that solution won't work because of X, Y, and Z. So I think let's try and work out what it is we're trying to achieve, and that is absolutely about an accessible city centre, and that's for everyone.
I mean, we have a right under law that protects our rights. We're one of the only minority groups that really does, and we're allowed to proactively protect our rights and getting around. And you also have, everyone has an anticipatory duty to do that too. That's in the Equality Act. And that's why we all need this training.
Thank you, Councillor Burton, and supplementary to that, really, and I think it touches on one of the points made by one of the public speakers. With all the people who are involved in this work, be them council staff or external consultants, how many roughly are sort of up to speed with disability equalities training? Do we look for particular credentials in that area to sort of support this work? I'm guessing. I mean, I want to say yes, but maybe that's complacent.
There is some mandatory training for staff around disability training. I know, for instance, the Streetworks team have just done a specific programme on how they undertake their role and had some specific training on that. So it is something we are alive to and keeping under review. We can always do better. We can always learn more. And, I'm not pretending we're perfect, but it is something we're acutely aware of and addressing.
And external to us, when we're picking a consultant, do we ask them about this on their side, or?
Yes, it's part of what we'd expect them to submit to us. Obviously, it depends on the procurement process we're going through. They are scalable in nature, as you can imagine, depending on the amount of money we spend. But yes, that's the answer.
Thank you, Councillor Avilius.
Just to provide some reassurance that this is an opportunity to air an idea before any scheme was drawn up. There would be significant engagement about who essential journeys, who needs to use that area, how do they need to use that area. There would be a whole raft of engagement that has to happen. So it's posing an idea without putting any imposition on it. And absolutely, we have been considering accessibility all along. In our transport expert advisory group, it's been really interesting. We have somebody from Wheels for Wellbeing there, and we have an access consultant there who specialises in all kinds of disability. So we've had some really useful feedback as well when we've explored different ideas. So there is that going on. And certainly when we're looking to engage with external consultants, we want them to be taking that into account, and we're making them aware of the sort of challenges we've had in the past and the priorities that our administration has now. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Revilius. On this list that I've got now, shout up if you think I've got it wrong. I've got Councillor Healy, Councillor Vassy, Councillor Merritt, then myself again. That's the list we have. Might bring it to an end after then because it's necessarily a long discussion. But let's see how we go. Councillor Healy, Councillor Stewart, I'll add you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll make this brief. First question, and I'll batch up the questions as well, so you can batch up the answers. What's going to be the effect of tier leaving? Question one. About a decade ago, 15 years ago, York was one of the only cities in the entire country where bus patronage went up. If you know, which is going back a bit, what change did we make back then that allowed us to buck the trend? Second question. Third question is, about a decade ago, we introduced 20 is plenty. And I would really like to see, maybe as like a sort of case study, is a decade ago, we spent £600,000, which nowadays would be, I don't know, $1 million, just over $1 million. We predicted it would produce these outcomes. It has or has not produced those outcomes, because we seem to be very good, you know, Christian's point earlier, but looking ahead, we don't seem to be very good at saying, well, the vision was this, we implemented this, cost us X, and the outcomes were Y. So it would be very good to have some, you know, real numbers in there. Maybe even something like a scheme costs £1 million and it has to generate 20% increase in pedestrian usage, but it's likely to cause 10% of car journeys to be 5 minutes longer. Just start to put some numbers around these things. And there you go, 4 questions in one.
Thank you, Councillor. Officers, you might need to ask him again what some of them were.
Yes, I'll see which questions escape me as we go along, and I'll trust Councillor Healy to update me if there's anything I'm not answering particularly. So I think tier, I'll defer to James to some extent on that question, but I seem to remember that use levels were about 800 rides a day or something like that within the context of a city where there are 200,000 car trips every day. So proportionately, even considering that not all of those 800 trips were abstracted from car, proportionately, actually it's quite small fry in the whole mix of things. James will no doubt say a bit more. The increase in bus use is interesting. I do know about that. We made quite a lot of it in the local plan examination when I was giving evidence for that. Bus use in York increased by 2/3 between 2000 and the beginning of the COVID pandemic. That is an experience which outside London is almost unique. It's not completely unique. In Bristol, it increased by slightly more, but it is pretty much unique in the UK. And I would say it is especially unique in a city like York, which has a number of challenges to its bus network, not least, you know, it's the length of the radials are not particularly long. There's quite a dispersed population in villages, etc., etc. A lot of that increase came from the increases in frequency on the core network, and a large amount, but by no means all of it, came from building additional park and ride facilities. One thing that I am constantly challenged by in the transport models we use is, and again, I had to touch on this in the local planning examination, is that there is an assumption in lots of the data that's provided to us by the DFT that growth in public transport does not happen. And in fact, ongoing year-on-year decline in public transport is baked into a lot of the forecasts for road traffic growth. And it can be quite difficult to argue that actually York has quite different trends. You asked about monitoring and evaluation. I've had the privilege of evaluating a number of York's transport interventions in my 10 years or so at the council. And it has led to a number of very long, highly technical reports, which we've submitted to the Department for Transport that talk about all the outcomes. We don't tend to make those public because they're very dull. But I would be delighted to share them with anyone who would like to see the information and analyse it and talk about some of the numbers that we talk about. But you know, we do that. It's often a statutory requirement of major schemes funding. It's a little bit different when we do schemes with our own funds because we're able to decide how we monitor and evaluate those. But anything that is a major DFT scheme would see a complex evaluation against both outcomes and output.
So what June's talked about in terms of that evaluation for DFT is what they call the Green Book process, which is a close down of your project. Our council project management toolkit also includes that close down process now. On tier leaving, I think the proof, of course, will be in the pudding. We will see a redistribution of those trips that have been on e-bikes or e-scooters across the different modes. So some people who were using one of those devices, some people will walk, some people will cycle, some people will go back to the bus, some people will drive. It will be spread across all of those inevitably. York's micro mobility is the DFT catchphrase for the tier service. So York's micro mobility scheme was quite tightly defined in that we had a set of criteria which we expected the operator to meet in terms of we didn't have a free floating model, which some cities have, where you can literally leave it anywhere and end your session. We said that it must be left in prescribed bays. That generally meant we didn't have some of the problems that other cities have had about them being left across pavements, creating accessibility problems. They haven't all ended up in the river either. So some of those things have been positives, but they have also, I think it's fair to say, and if Tia here would say it, have made their financial model more difficult to run. What would help is this was a one-year trial that I think is now in its third or fourth year. So I think some clarity about the long term of the micro mobility legislation is probably going to help as well in terms of the viability of those trials going forward.
Thank you. Next I've got Councillor. Sure. Yeah.
Has the council then done the close down report on 20 is plenty?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't.
Has the council done its own internal close down report on 20 is plenty?
I would have to check that.
Yeah, if you could.
It's not something that I've been involved in.
Councillor Vassie, you've been very patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This morning I saw a social media video of the cycling funeral cortege for Kerry Ashton. It was touching and heartfelt. It's impossible to imagine such an event in my ward. There is no safe cycle network, despite decades of the community clamouring to try and get such a thing. I am somewhat more hopeful, having heard what the executive member has said to the previous remarks I made. And the executive member and the new mayor have both publicly said they want to see a cycle path from Elvington and Weldrake into Heslington. And that heartens me. I hope we'll deliver on it. I hope to get everyone, maybe I sounded too angry earlier on, but you have to understand, for rural residents, seeing a presentation when 90% of the maps don't even show our wards is hardly a recipe for anything other than cynicism. People in my wards, I'm sure, would be very happy to talk about Ouse Bridge and bus movements in the city. The trouble is they don't even have a bus that gets into the city. So improving the buses in the city is of kind of limited interest until there's more than a pointy stick to tell us you shouldn't use your car, you should be using a bus. Where is it? You shouldn't be using a car, you should be using your bike. Where's the safe cycle path? So I endorse what you said, Chair, about, you made reference to Tony May and timelines and coherent targets and funding programs, developed schemes that can attract funding, implementing them, monitoring their implementation, as Councillor Healy has said. I hope maybe the executive member can at least let us know that she still wants to see a rural cycle network come to life. We received hundreds of thousands of pounds and put money aside to deliver that particular path. It's only one of many, but we got funding to do it. We got a detailed plan from Sustrans, 170 pages of it. We know how to deliver that. We've got a mayor now who has responsibility, an executive member who I know gets it. Can we have some reassurance for people in rural wards that actually this business of the energy transition in transport includes the villages rather than focusing on the city centre? Because the past 20 years, it's always been in the city centre. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vassie. I think there'll be a recommendation in that territory, to be honest. But we'll come to that. Does anyone want to come back to the comments is made, or Councillor Avilius?
Just really quickly to say, I absolutely hear you. And I know that tonight's presentation has focused on this city centre as a kind of first step of our movement and place plan. But the challenge we are putting to ourselves and to the consultants who are helping us with that approach is, how do we make this work for the whole city, and the whole city, including not just the villages, but also how do we connect it? How do we connect it to North Yorkshire? Because now we are thinking regionally. How do we connect it to West Yorkshire, to East Yorkshire? How do we make sure that people can move and that brings economic growth to the city, and that people can go to the places outside of our city as well? So it is a challenge, and we can't do everything at once, but I absolutely hear you that there is need for that connectivity to all the villages. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, briefly, Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad to hear that. I know from conversations I've had with councillors in other parts of Yorkshire adjoining York that there is also an appetite for that coherence you're talking about. And I understand from what you're saying that that's precisely what the mayor's remit is for. So we all have to hope that we'll move forwards purposefully. I can only urge you not to get too bogged down in the minutiae, because with limited staff, I can see another 4 years passing and we'll have a few little things being done, but that big picture has still never been realised. I wish you all the luck.
Thank you for that. Next, I've got Councillor Merritt, who's been exceptionally patient. Brace yourselves.
I'm going to keep. I'm not going to be too long, Chair. I'll come back to what Councillor Fenton and Councillor Vassie said near the beginning of the meeting, talking about a vision and also talking about how we keep people on board. Because actually, I think those, you know, are things that we absolutely have to keep in mind. There have been past visions for tackling transport in the city, but the reality is that most of the population were largely unaware of them. And, you know, as a point about the detail, Christian, the reality is you come unstuck when you come to the specific schemes. It's not the vision that causes the problem. It's not the transport strategy, which, you know, I'm not saying is motherhood and apple pie, but which is generalized, and people don't necessarily see how that will actually come out on the ground. And when proposals come forward, in terms of it coming out of the ground, not everyone perhaps is consistent with what they've said when they've been talking about the principles. So, you know, nonetheless, I think the results of that consultation that Lara went through earlier are very positive. I think there has been a real shift in public attitudes that gives us this city an opportunity for doing some of the things that specialist transport advisors have said for 50 years. If you go back to the medium-term travel study that the County Council produced in 1976, which said that we needed to do things to remove traffic from through the city centre. It's actually not quite 50, 48 years. We now have an opportunity to make those changes, but we will only be able to make those changes if we carry people with us. And that is why I'm disappointed in the paper, because whilst Kate, as the exec member, very much emphasised the point about engagement, this paper doesn't actually say that as a core part of what needs to be done. So if we make just one recommendation, we need to say an essential part of this strategy is the engagement and communication strategy for actually delivering the movement and place plan. And I hope that's something that we can all agree on. But I'd also come back perhaps to Paul. Paul mentioned the bus corridor through the city centre and then sort of retreated later. We actually have to be brave on all sides of this table if we are going to make a difference. And that's been one of the curses of transport policy in the past in this city, that it has been too often used as a political football. And the reality is, if we're going to move forward, we actually need to cooperate and come to agreement on what needs to be done and be united in communicating that, in dealing with, you know, legitimate public concerns and interests, and finding the way through some of those Gordian knots in terms of the potential conflicts between different users.
I agree entirely. Is there a question coming, Councillor Merritt? I'm really sorry. I've put you a bit of slack because you've been waiting.
Through some of our recommendations. I'll just finish the point quickly.
Okay.
Kate and others pointed to the impact of the slow bus journeys through York for users across the whole of North Yorkshire. That is why tackling the city centre bus routes is important. We actually also have the money in the BSIP. And as was pointed out earlier, we have 10 months left of that nominal programme to deliver the bus priorities aspect of the BSIP. I hope that, and that will be my number 2 recommendation, that some part of the quick wins is taking forward those bus priority schemes that we actually have the funding for, that a lot of the consultancy work has now been done on, but which haven't yet come forward in terms of consultation and engagement with the public on delivering. We do, you know, that needs to be a priority too, as does the rapid completion of the movement and place plan, and making sure it does cover all the aspects that Tony May touched on earlier. And that's perhaps recommendation 3 that we ought to be.
Noted, yeah. Thank you, Councillor Merritt. I mean, they weren't questions, they were suggested recommendations, so we'll come back to them and we'll go to next person in the queue. Sorry to be a bit blunt, I don't mean to be disrespectful. So I was next in this queue, and then it's Councillor Stewart even. So yeah, I want to ask about balance and geographical spread. And this has come up in different ways tonight. And, you know, this is just an idea, and I want to know what officers and the executive member think about this, because there's only ever a limited pot and limited resource and time. But is there scope to have sort of ward sort of sections of this overall local transport strategy and plan that can ensure that ward priorities don't just continue to keep coming last versus the still important city centre changes that need to take place? I'm not suggesting one over the other, but there needs to be a level of balance that still brings the whole city as a place forward. Does that make sense? I'd welcome views on that. Councillor Avilius, then James.
Just to say that what we want to achieve with this movement and place plan, as I alluded to earlier, was to make the city a healthier, wealthier place. It's to improve people's lives. And so the approach we want to take is to actually make transport more equitable. So for the people who don't have access to a car, young people who can't drive, disabled people who have different transport needs or fewer options. So it's looking at those people who have fewer options and fewer ways to move around at the moment, and trying to literally level up so that people have equal transport opportunities to move around. And you're absolutely right about not just focusing on the city centre, that we need to start recognising that we have other urban centres in York, and those are important and those are developing and they need to be supported. And also people from different areas want to travel to those other urban centres. So we don't want for York for a long time has been a sort of one centre place, and it's just now emerging into a multi-centre place, and we want to support that. And we want to support people to go out to the countryside. So it's recognising the amazing variety and diversity that our city has. And that's something that's really special about York, that we have lovely green spaces, we have small urban centres, we have a historic city core, and we want people to be able to access all of that, but with equality, so that everybody has those transport options, not just the people who have access to a car or who can drive or who, So it's trying to address that and using some of the data that's come out of the consultation, which is really valuable to help us understand which areas of the city are transport deprived and need that boost. So we can look at that. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Avilius. Any officers want to?
I'll just be very quick. I think the opportunity for co-production on the movement and place plan enables wards to get involved in that, exactly that point you were making, in terms of the importance within immediate local communities.
Yeah, sure, Councillor Nelson. Thank you, James.
Thank you. It just that would be excellent. It strikes me that when the transport strategy events kind of programme was delivered, there was a bit of disjoint actually between ward teams, like things happening in wards or things being available and not all ward teams necessarily realising that that was available, or finding out quite late, oh, actually we could be asking for these things to be happening in our ward as part of the big transport conversation. So if we could tighten that up a little bit for the next phase, I think that would be great, if we could make sure that ward engagement is really clear, because I feel like some of the opportunity perhaps was missed with the big transport conversation for some of that ward engagement.
I would agree with that, and I think one of the really important things that we've got to bear in mind as we roll out the new transport strategy, and this is as much for the mayor's transport strategy as the City of York Council transport strategy, is you know, this is the beginning of the conversation. There's loads and loads of engagement to come, and actually that brings attention, because we've got to, you know, we don't want to end up in a situation where people are saying, oh God, they're not asking us about transport again. But we need to make sure we do the right amount of consultation and in the right places, and for it to matter and for it to be representative. And I think I'd say that, you know, me or Lara, we're always very happy to come out and talk to individual wards. I did something in Haxby about a month ago, which was after our big transport conversation closed, but it was still a very useful exercise, and it gave me a lot of insight. So yeah, I'm always very happy to come and talk to ward committees or parish councils or whatever.
Thank you. My other question was basically, it's touching on the sort of 10 focus areas, and the percentages of people that like the idea of them are all very positive, which is, you know, a source of optimism, but also they all sound nice, and I can't see many people saying, no, I wouldn't like that. And because they're all very positive. And the challenge with this, as we know, is what the people think when there's a proposal on the table. And I wondered if I don't know if you can talk in terms of timescales, but it'd be useful to know how far we are off a place where the council's communications and engagement on the potential changes that will happen will be specific. Because I almost think that's the way we've got to go. That I think an accusation that could be leveled at what we've seen tonight is that and it's a cynical one, but I can see why it would be said, is that it's a little bit defensive because it's all so nice and positive. So how far off with that crunch point when people start to actually decide that they don't want a better place and they'll oppose it because a handful of lad residents in their street don't like it? You know, how far away are we from those awkward conversations that need to happen? Can anyone answer that? I might not have worded it the right way, but that's the tasty bit, and that's what's going to decide if this succeeds or fails. Who dares? Go on.
Yeah, so the supporting documents that we'll be bringing to the June executive, in particular, that movement and place plan, will be talking about, here's a first phase of something we could do and a scheme that we can draw up and engage on really soon. And what my sense of pace is here is that we want to deliver something significant in the next year. So that means, yes, we'll be bringing forward a scheme to talk about a concrete, hopefully not concrete, a bit more green thing in that we want to engage on and actually deliver in the next year to 18 months. And then it's then the second phase of, is it going to be multiple schemes or is it going to be scheme by scheme by scheme? But yeah, I need the sort of guidance on that approach about how best to do the next phases. But I know that it's critical that we do something significant and meaningful in the next year to 18 months. So that means in the coming months, we want to start engaging with people on a scheme. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Villiers. You're all right, officers, you don't have to jump in. I wasn't sure. Okay.
Well, no, I suppose the only thing I would add is the value. You're absolutely right. There's going to be some difficult conversations in delivering any of these schemes. The value of the work that Laura's done and the value of the movement and place plan is it enables us to put in context the citywide ambition and stop it just being about a conversation about a street.
Yeah.
And that's really important in terms, and we hold on to that right the way through, that this is about citywide change, not just about your street.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that, James. Okay, I did have other questions, but I'll leave it because of time. Councillor Stewart, and then we'll jump to recommendations if that's all right with colleagues, because it's gone 8. Go on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just really about buy-in, because I do think buy-in is all important, and that's what we've got to get right. And obviously, Councillor Healy made the comment earlier about. Don't know what I'm going to say. Made the comment earlier about Ousbridge, and in truth, it was a sensible thing to say. But in York, we are too short-sighted, and we do need that overarching vision that Councillor Vassy has talked about earlier. So I think we've got to explore these things, and we've got to take people with us. And I think one of the things that came out from the sort of the survey was there is still that group of motorists particularly who feel this is something being done to them rather than with them. And I also think there's likely to be a real risk of a perceived or actual urban-rural divide. And I think those would be the two natural things you'd get with any sort of transport plan. So we've got a great opportunity to move from a sort of glass half empty to a glass half full. But if we can really say it's that whole thing about I am in traffic rather than I am the traffic, you know, we can do a lot more, I think, for car drivers. There's some really good things. If you want to drive your car all the time, you're going to benefit if fewer people drive their cars, and you know, if nothing else than that. But I think that the whole city centre focus, it does concern me. You know, it does worry me a bit about some of the stuff we've seen, that it is this junction here, this junction there. And I appreciate the point about our buses can get through the city quicker if we have better junctions. But you know, things like the Clifton cycle lane, which was put in and then taken out, and those sort of things. I think people are worried that that's going to be the sort of focus. You know, for me, people in the villages want bolder stuff. The cycle lanes linking through, things like buses that will loop up, maybe take people to park and rides, those sorts of things we've talked about that would be the game changers that we can see rather than necessarily junctions. And the one point I really want to make about sort of how we take people with us is that obviously when things go to executive, in practice, understandably, we've got executive, we've got public speakers, but decisions have been taken. This committee really is the key way that people can feed in their views. And so I think it's really, really important that we get things in good time ahead of executive so we can consider that. And one of the things I was a bit disappointed about tonight was that, you know, our agenda papers were 20 pages long. You know, I think those presentations that we've had would have been vastly, vastly better as part of the report. If they'd been part of the report, and the consultation closed in February, I do think in late May it's reasonable we could have had that written up for ourselves before tonight. You know, James has sort of hot off the press, but I think a week ahead of it of now would have been good. People could have seen them, and we're all genuinely pleased we've got 3 public speakers, but we could have had sort of 6 or 8 public speakers. This could have been a really good discussion forum. We could have had, that's the report, that's the sort of 70-page report, and then at sort of 5:35 we kick off with the public speakers. At 5:50 we kick off with the debate, and I think that'll be more positive. So I think the more information we get here, the better, because that will enable the buy-in, the cross-party working, and the cross-city and cross-group working. And then I think we can truly make some positive decisions rather than it being a sort of very controversial, you know, one group said this, well, don't worry, that group will be out of power, another group says this, you know, sort of working. I didn't hear what Councillor Nelson said, but I assume it was a heckle, so.
I think that's all. I wouldn't disagree with any of that. I mean, in officers' defence, you know, our work plan has been sort of forming itself in the last month or two, and they have probably an unbelievable amount of other things on their plate to juggle. I suspect that if they could have shared this paper with us earlier, they would have done. But look, in terms of moving forward, I completely agree. And what would really help us, I think, given the significance of this piece of work, is when we know decisions are coming up about this whole thing, we can get it into our work plan fairly easy. It will mean other things get dropped and pushed back, but if we want to prioritise this, we have the ability to do that. But I share the whole sentiment behind what you're getting at. So if I may, colleagues, it'd be good to look at recommendations. I mean, what I'd like to do is say the committee is happy with the approach so far, but with additional points that need sort of further thought or consideration by the relevant executive member and involved officers. Because I personally don't have worries about the general approach, but there's certain bits that need tightening up or adding to. So I have a list of things. One is quite sort of straightforward. I think Lara, you mentioned in your presentation that you can provide ward-specific data. I think it'd be really handy for all ward teams to have. I know it's work, but whatever data could be broken down on a ward by ward basis, if that could be packaged and shared with each ward team, that'd just be really handy to know. Is that something that could be done?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it, there were an awful lot of maps and graphs and things that are produced that didn't go in that. So I've got a lot of that information already. And if there's any particular areas of topics of interest or anything that anybody wants, just let me know and we can do that. Give me a bit of time and I'll do it for each ward. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't think it's urgent, but given that it's there, it'd be good to have, I think. And then there's this point around whether it's a local transport plan for each ward or the urban centres that are emerging, making sure there isn't an urban versus rural divide. I think there's something in, and I don't know the exact form of words, but I'll try and put some together on the spot to recommend that the executive member works with officers to ensure that all parts of the city are more, I don't know, God, struggling. I can't think. Has anyone got any ideas? Yeah, Councillor Merritt. Put your microphone on, please, Councillor Merritt, just for the millions waiting at home to hear what you've got to say.
I was just going to say, yeah, I think it's important that the movement and place plan, how is it going to address local transport issues and concerns?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I'm comfortable
I'm not
enough with that.
specifying the form or anything, just that needs to address that.
Yeah.
I hope that encompasses what you're after.
I think that's
like to see.
helpful. Councillor Nelson and then Julian. Oh, sorry, Julian. Thank you.
I was just going to add, I mean, there's a lot of focus on this in the emerging guidance that we get about local transport plans. And the phrase that is used is place-based. Appreciating that different places have different requirements, needs, and issues that they face. And I mean, we have it. Obviously, York and North Yorkshire Combined Authority have it in spadefuls because, you know, the problems they find at the top end of Wharfdale are completely different from the ones in the industrial areas around Tadcaster.
Yeah.
And, you know, different again from what they have in Scarborough. So I think use of I think talking about place-based and talking about the appropriate level of geography is also what's often used, meaning, you know, having the right number of places, being able to look at, you know, places in a coherent way, and their relationship between different places and to what extent they're self-contained. And it's also, possibly finally, it's also very, very important for the new developments that we see rolling out and how you plan for those. So I think I would use the phrase place-based.
Okay, well, thank you. Councillor Vassie, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, similar comment on this, that a recommendation that all schemes clearly include that the schemes that we're going to be putting before the executive, that go before the executive, include all wards and not just the city centre as one thing. I think that points have been made variously about the need to think as well beyond the boundaries of the city. And the other thing I'd say in response to what Councillor Merritt said earlier is maybe a recommendation that we ensure that all BSIP money is spent. I've certainly seen too many times in my time as a councillor, money's not being spent. So ensure that all BSIP money is spent and that the funding spend includes all the wards and their public transport priorities. Because that way we know we've got millions of pounds. What we didn't have until now is a sense that that money is something to enable the whole of York to work better. we've got a year left. Maybe encouragement from this committee that all that money is spent and that it remembers that we're a York, not just a city.
Thank you, councillor Vassy. I have made a note of this BSIP funding point.
Oh, right, okay.
I'm still comfortable with councillor Merritt's suggested wording on this point about the sort of whole city approach. I mean, it could even, I think some of it is presentational, because making the city centre more free flowing for buses does benefit outer areas, but some of it will involve specific points about outer areas and what's important to them. Councillor, no, okay, thank you. Quick wins. So councillor Merritt, sort of seconded by councillor Vassy, to recommend that the executive member works with officers to take forward the bus priority schemes that have BSIP funding, because we're against the clock on that, I understand. I mean, we can make the recommendation. What happens with that remains to be seen. But do we have any comment on that from officers or the soon to be appointed executive member? Is there a danger that we'll lose this money if it's not spent?
It's very unusual for DFT to claw money back. They normally will slip it over. There will inevitably, as we work through this, be a review of what the bus priority measures are, because they aren't necessarily all detailed. Some of them may well be part of that route that's on screen now, obviously, if that is a scheme we bring forward. But no, yes, there's a risk. There is a timeline for that. But I think they've recently extended it anyway, haven't they?
Yeah, they've agreed to it. My understanding is that they've already agreed to a 6-month extension.
Okay. I had a hand from councillor Vassy on this. I've got you, councillor Healy. Sorry, go on.
Just to say, my ward, and I know lots of others, have been waiting over 15 months for real-time displays at rural bus stops.
Oh, second.
Easy little thing that could be done so that people arriving at a bus that only comes every 2 hours know if it's been.
Yeah.
BSIP funding, I understood, was possibly involved with that, but we're still waiting anyway.
I'll take it upon myself to follow that up, if that's an issue, because the equipment was ordered some time ago. There might be an issue with the supplier, but I'll follow it up and get back to you.
Thank you. But I think the point about urgency has been made and has been received. There was a point made around language and ensuring that the sort of comms and engagement on this sort of works to language. What would be the phrase? Yeah, recommended by the social model or consistent with the social model. Yeah. Well, yes. I wouldn't want to. I mean, I think that's separate to the language issue and absolutely vital. But hopefully that will be an ongoing thing that we'll all be raising as particulars of the local transport plan come forward. 1 second, sorry, got all sorts here. There was a comment, I think it was my suggestion, about well, it was more of a question, wasn't it? But this idea about being more open in what we're going to be proposing. We need the language to be plain English. People can understand it and get into it. But I mean, that's something we often say at this committee. But if we can keep that in mind, because if it's all vague and fluffy and nice, it's not going to mean anything to people. Councillor Nelson.
In a slight separate, very small recommendation, when we're doing papers like this, I feel like it would have just been really useful to have the bridges, the names of the bridges on, because the whole time I was going, wait, is that like, you know, if we're talking about language and accessibility, actually, in our papers, just making sure that things are clearly,
I mean, yeah,
in lay people's language.
I think we can work that into the point on on language.
The report is fabulous and the slides are fabulous. I hate acronyms, especially when they're not the ones that you would be using or recognise in your like daily conversations.
So prior to these papers being added to the public papers online, can we have a look at the slides and just make them a bit more easy to understand?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very happy to do that.
Cheers. Councillor Healy, you had your hand up. Sorry, we've jumped
Sorry.
around a bit.
Couple of points. Can you add the presentations when you do the minutes? First point. Second point, can you add the DFT reports and the 20-mile-an-hour closure report to the minutes? So they're available for
Sorry,
public consumption.
can you repeat those?
The DFT reports that you mentioned, can you add them as like links when we publish the minutes?
I'm happy to share the ones that we've done. My understanding was that 20's Plenty was financed internally, so it may or may not have a report associated with it.
I've never seen one, so I'll be interested to see, because there should have been a project closure report, because all big projects should have closure reports.
Yeah, I'd have to look into that.
Check anyway.
Councillor Haley, what was the thing you said before that? Slides. I mean, the slides won't be included in the minutes.
Just add them onto the page.
They'll be part of the public papers online.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah. When you do take the schemes to the June report, can you pick up Councillor May's point and my point around, you know, how much does it cost? What positives are you likely to see? And it will also be very useful if we are going to be shifting capacity to say cyclists away from cars. What's the likely impact on cars? So this scheme will likely mean it takes an extra 10 minutes and it is likely to affect 5,000 people. And we are prepared to accept that because we will see we project we will see an increase of 1,000 cycle trips and it will be 2 minutes quicker. So something where you can weigh up negatives and positives and actually have a number. And this scheme will cost £1 million, for instance.
I mean, how many more things have you got there?
That's it.
Okay, cool. You look like you're gearing up for some more. I mean, I think, yeah, Professor May's point around the need for this to have, I think he said, the structure, targets, performance indicators, and evidence-based implementation plan. I mean, I would happily support a recommendation to urge the executive member and officers to make sure that the local transport plan has all of those things. I would like to hope that that's the sort of thing it would include anyway. I mean, did you want to say anything, Julian? Forgive me.
Not really. I mean,
okay,
yes, it would have those aspects that I mean, parts of it are being written at the moment, and that is, they form parts of it.
Councillor Stewart?
Just two things, just to say again, I think the point about the community transport, that it would be good to have a recommendation about that. And just secondly, you know, I think for me, York has too often seen itself as being, you know, the great empire of York rather than the great empire of York that's part of a broader area. And obviously now more than ever with the mayoral region, where obviously going to be York and North Yorkshire, it's probably worth having a recommendation that we do take full account of how we link up with North Yorkshire, not just York, and particularly from a rural point of view. You know, many of the buses that benefit the villages, you can't consider without working closely with North Yorkshire or East Yorkshire. So just to have that as a particular game changer now with the mayor and his region.
I'm not sensing dissent on either of those points. Thanks for reminding me about the community transport one as well. So that would be a recommendation to the executive member to ensure that York's community transport provision is sort of a part of this work. Again, you'd like to think it would be, but given that there's been a good task group working on it, it's an opportunity there. I want to wrap it up there, if I may, colleagues. I want to say a real big thank you to everyone, especially the officers for sticking this out. It's a long night, but this was always going to be a biggie. and I'd rather we spend good time on it. Very grateful for your time and your responses. And hopefully we'll have you back as this thing continues to move forward. I nearly said plod along, but hopefully it's more than plodding. Speeding forward. No, can't say drive forward, no. But yeah, thank you. We have one more item, which is to look at the work plan. I suggest that we don't spend undue time on it, given it's getting on. But I do want to let colleagues know that, and James, we can discuss this now. Yorkshire Water have agreed to join us for the June meeting, which is positive, and it will make an interesting discussion, even though we have no real authority over them as a council. It's a matter of serious public interest. James, I know you've asked me outside of the meeting if we could consider trying to move that to July due to an officer resource issues. Is it?
Trying to turn the wrong thing on. Must be late. Yes, so the challenge I have is the officer who would normally write the report as the context for Yorkshire Water, because you want a report to go with it, is currently a vacant post. I can write you a very basic extent of my knowledge piece, which is, well, the danger is it undermines a bit of that, because it will basically say the council doesn't actually have a regulatory role, it's the Environment Agency. So I could articulate a little bit of that into a short paper for you, but it won't go into huge amounts of detail. I just want to manage expectations that with an officer vacancy in terms of expertise, we are going to be stretching ourselves in terms of that report.
Yeah,
but if you've got them attending, I can also understand attention that you would like them to attend.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that input. I mean, I'd be quite comfortable with a very, very basic CYC covering report. With all due respect to the council, I think Yorkshire Water will be the sort of ultimate focus. Previous officer Steve Ragg gave a very comprehensive presentation a few months back, so we're sort of covered on that side. But appreciate the consideration. That could be shared again. What Steve put together could be included again in those papers. Is that fair?
Yeah, I don't see why not. We can
just for reference.
Yeah.
Okay. Because of time, what I'll do, colleagues, is I'll send you what Yorkshire Water have sent to me in terms of what they think they're going to cover. I'll have a pretty strict deadline for any further ideas you might have, but get back to me if you have anything else you'd like them to cover. Councillor Fenton.
Just to request for the June meeting, if we could have an agenda item for the Dial-in Right Task and Finish group to report back.
Yes, so in reality, it is there. It's just not there on paper, which isn't any good to anyone, but definitely. So you're still good to present in June. Yeah, awesome. And we have had another task group proposal from Councillor Stewart. I mean, do you want to say anything about it? I think it's a good idea. The challenge, as ever, is have we got people willing to put the time in? But do you want to add anything to that?
I think, Chair, no, exactly as you say. I've thrown it in there as an idea. I think very self-explanatory in the sort of suggested remit. So it would be very member heavy, well, not member heavy, very officer light in terms of, I think it would be about having members put the work in. So it would basically be about if there are people willing to join such a task group, we could crack on. If there aren't, we can't.
Yeah, it's worth adding that the executive member, Councillor Kent, has said that she'd really welcome work on this front as well. Something to mull over, but if you are interested, put your hand up and we'll get it up and running. Councillor Nelson?
I was just going to say it might be a suggestion to come back to that at the next meeting because the makeup of the committee is slightly changing.
That's a good point. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Nelson. I will miss those of you who are moving on. I'm sure you won't be too far away. But anyway, less of that. With all of that said, I'm happy to sort of come back to the work plan next month. I have no urgent business. I'm very grateful for all your time. Enjoy your nights. Thank you. Cheers.